welcome back to the On Texas Football, the Wednesday night live stream. We are live on the On Texas Football YouTube channel. Hope everybody's having a great evening. I am Jeff Howe. Joining me, as always, on Wednesdays is lifetime Longhorn national champion Marcus Myers. Marcus, that doesn't get old, does it? Like, for the rest of your days on this mortal earth, you get introduced as national champion Marcus Myers.
It's a pretty cool distinction, you know. I don't mind it. I have a number of friends that are Olympians, and they all put the OLY behind their names, like in titles and stuff. So, yeah,
you put BCS or something on yours, or NC, whatever.
LinkedIn has my MBA back there, but
there you go. All right, we'll hey, if anybody in the chat wants to get into have Marcus share some national championship stories or whatever, we can do that. We've got some current business to take care of also as it relates to the Longhorns. As always, we're taking your questions, comments, grievances, anything you got, line it up in the chat. We'll get to it. Super chats, as always, jump to the front of the line. Marcus, let's go ahead and start off CB. So where are all your rings, Marcus?
I have them secured safely somewhere. We'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I can get to them when I need them, CB. The only one that I keep a little closer is the national championship one, but the rest are filed away for safekeeping.
You guys got 2 rings for the national championship season, right, Marcus?
Yeah, there was like a black one that I think either the BCS or the Big 12 awarded us or something. Mm-hmm. It was like a black one that like it was kind of silver, but then had like a black stone in the middle, and then a 1 was kind of depressed, like carved out in the middle of it. And then we had the one that the seniors got to design. So that's the one that I tend to wear the most when I do wear it. The other one I have put up.
Now, I will ask you this. I've never asked you this, so since we're live, I'll go ahead and ask you. Rod infamously has gone through 2 T rings. The last one, or I think maybe just one, but he lost his T ring, was washing his hands in a restroom at a restaurant, and left it on the sink. And Rod is at some point, I promise everybody, Rod will get that T ring replaced. Do you keep your T ring close to you, Marcus? Do you know where it is right now?
Right there, buddy.
There you go.
Only reason I had it in my bag because I was doing a little yard work earlier. And so I took it off, but I put it away. I have lost it before, and did have to order another one. And I think it happened the same way. I think I was like trying to wash a bunch of stuff off my hands from doing some stuff, threw it in a pocket somewhere. And so fortunately, Casey in the football office, she and Ricky Brown hooked me up and helped me order one. It's interesting. They actually come from a place here in Austin, but you have to if you need to get a repair to it, you have to mail it to them, and you can't pick them up. And then for you to receive them, they have to mail them to you. You can't go pick them up. So
interesting. I didn't know that much about the T ring, but I was a freshman going into my sophomore year of high school. I went to Max football camp, and that's when I learned about the T ring and how important it was. And I remember a couple years later, one of my high school coaches actually walked on at Texas, graduated. He was on the 95 team that won the last Southwest Conference Championship.
Okay.
He was on the 96 team that won the first Big 12 championship. And he's got his conference championship rings. I was like, Coach, why don't you ever wear your T ring? He's like, I don't know. Just don't ever wear it. I'm like, what's a big deal? I'm like, next time you go, down to Austin or go to a game, you should wear it. I'm like, people will notice it, and it's a really big deal. And he had, one random game came back. He's like, hey, it is a really big deal. I didn't realize how big a deal it was to wear the T ring. So yeah, you only get the T ring letter winners who graduate. That's how you get the T ring. So
no other way to get you one. And that's the one that I wear daily, Jeff, because a lot of people buy class rings, but to your point, letter and graduate. So for me, that was effectively my class ring. So I wear it daily, and it's the one that, oddly enough, people spot the most. If I'm boarding planes sometimes, or, just kind of like hanging around somewhere, like people recognize it. So it certainly is pretty cool. And it's one of those deals where it wasn't an option in my household to not come out of Texas with a degree. So I make sure that Mama's proud for me wearing it.
That was a Mac deal. Mac just did such a good job when he got to Texas of revitalizing the history of the program. And thankfully, that's still around and still a big deal. And a lot of the stuff that Mac brought to the table and implemented in '98 and throughout his tenure shout out to actually was on that interview, by the way, is Marcus, let's get to this. We were talking before we started. We both watched the Sark interview that he did with Josh Pate. That I believe it dropped either last night or this morning. It's within the last 24, 36 hours that it's dropped. And I watched it. And if you were watching that for if you're watching it for like some hardcore X's and O's or big time team intel, probably wasn't worth watching for you. But one thing that I did take from that, Marcus, is, and I think Sark didn't say it, but he talked about, hey, not taking anything for granted. Yeah. And we're going to make sure we maximize every day. And he didn't come out and say it, but I feel like when you start, and maybe it's just me looking at it in hindsight, I don't know, but you start looking back on last season, and it did kind of feel like maybe, I'm not saying complacency set in, but maybe guys that knew nothing at that point in their career except going to the playoff just kind of maybe took it for granted that, hey, we'll be in the playoff, no question. And you end the season on the outside looking in, and you go to the Citrus Bowl. And I think it's naturally kind of added that sense of urgency that we saw throughout the spring. So that was kind of the one thing I took from it, Marcus. And that's one thing that I will say, I don't know if you call it culture or whatever, it's just markedly different from this time last year where they understand, hey, you got to basically, it's cliche, but you got to win every day to get to where you want to be in November, December.
Yeah. To your point, like it wasn't anything groundbreaking. I mean, almost it looked very similar to the last time he interviewed with Pate because, they were still in the same room, with that Longhorn Earl and what you call it backdrop. And so, it was, if anything, I just like the fact that it feels like Sark is very comfortable with, who he is. He's talked both in that interview. I know we talked some about the Get Got podcast with Rod last Wednesday when I was on with him, where he did the show with Michael Robinson episode with Michael Robinson and Marshawn Lynch. Mm-hmm. And he talks a lot about just his growth as a person. And I think that kind of comes through in his conversation. And I think it also, I think because of it being so difficult, to win the national championship, he recognizes the window, I think, that he's in and, the talent that he has. And so it's almost like he was speaking from a place of hunger, a place of, pure, solid intention in everything that they do. And also, found it, I can't remember if it was that episode or, the other one I just referenced, where he also spoke to, this summer they get to work with the guys. And I forgot that that's something that, got implemented a couple years back. And so, I think this time frame, basically from now until when they, report back at end of May, early June, whenever it ends up being, is going to be critical, for the guys to get their bodies healthy, get their minds right, stay out of trouble, and then be ready to hit the ground running, because it sounds like, Sark very much so is. And so, yeah, I enjoyed hearing him, just talk. It just sounded like a guy that feels good about where his team is sitting today, but recognizes that, it's still a long road ahead of him to get to mid to late January. And hopefully we're in Vegas.
I shouldn't oversimplify it, but I will. I think if you're Sark, you realize that you've got X number of games left with Arch as your quarterback, and you got X number of games with Colin Simmons, and you haven't gotten to the mountaintop yet. I'm not just saying it's about those two guys, Marcus, but those are, I hate using the term generational talent because it gets overused, but those are two guys that could go down as historically great players in the history of this program. That'll light a fire under you to make sure you get it done. I think that's why we saw them take the approach they did in the portal, maximizing the portal, and building the kind of roster they built. You got to go all in while you got this little window. You talk about windows, and you got this window with Arch and Colin Simmons, maybe the best quarterback in the country, maybe the best defensive player in the country. You better do everything you can to maximize it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those deals where you look at it and it's like, man, I feel really good about the way I recruit, if you're Sark, I feel really good about, some of the development that we got going. I feel really good about ability to pull guys from the portal and the resources that, CDC affords them and boosters and all that. At the same time, you can't really script the next time you may have, some of the level of talent that they have. And I saw, one of the folks in the chat, asking me, are we blowing smoke or is Texas really elite right now? And I think, maybe the best way to kind of answer that, Roger's question there is like, on paper, they're absolutely elite. Like you can't really deny what they've assembled on paper. But as we've seen, on paper doesn't win at all, right? It requires, the connective tissue for everybody on the team to pull together, the right coaching, obviously discipline, and so not as many penalties, all those kinds of things. But the most talented team isn't the one that hoisted the trophy last year. So I think the talent level is elite, and then I think it is TBD on, do they gel and truly become a team that can really go out there and function at that high level? Because in my opinion, make no mistake about it, the schedule is a challenging schedule. If for nothing other than, after that Tennessee game, right, you get your first 4 games, you get a bye, and then you don't have another one, which means you got 8 straight SEC games, plus, whatever the playoff looks like. Yeah. So I think it's one of those deals where, it'll play itself out sooner rather than later. But what he's assembled on paper is, I don't think there's too many, coaches across the country that are going to be, wouldn't be willing to trade significant parts of their roster for what Sark's put together.
Yeah, I think you answered that perfectly, Marcus, because that's what I was going to say to Roger's question. It's an elite roster. Like you can't deny that. Even if you're the biggest Aggie or Sooner in the world, like you have to look at this roster and be like, yeah, that's an elite roster. Like you potentially got 4 first-round draft picks on this roster in the 27 draft. We talk about Arch, Trevor Gooseby, Colin Simmons, and Cam Coleman. Will it be an elite team? That remains to be seen, because there's a lot. Look, I know people are going to like mark the spot on your bingo card because I'm about to tell this little anecdote, but I remember it was the year Urban Meyer he took a year off between his last year at Florida and his first year at Ohio State. And we saw some of the issues start to surface at Florida. And I'll never forget, he was doing TV with ESPN, and he said, there's a difference between collecting talent and building a team. And at some point late in my time in Florida, we forgot that. And yeah, like the teams he had, the national championship teams that he had, especially that team in 08, you had some personalities on that team. You had some characters on that team. Yep. But that team had football character too. Like, no matter what's going on, you still come together and you can be disciplined enough for just long enough with all that extra stuff that we now know was going on the outside that it didn't matter. So that will be the proof will be in the pudding for Texas as far as that goes. We're going to talk all summer about the penalties and the kicking game and making sure the offensive line's right. But yeah, it's an elite roster. Will it be an elite team? Remains to be seen. And we will definitely keep breaking that down. Right now, we're going to take a little time out to thank our lead sponsor for the Wednesday night live stream here on Texas Football. That is Andy Ludicky and My Perfect Franchise. If you're stuck in the corporate rat race with 2 weeks PTO and you've got no control over the money you can make or your schedule in general, just give Andy a call and he'll take you through a process to help you find a business that's going to fit your skill set and your financial goals. Franchise ownership is something that's not for everybody, but if you've got a desire to take control of your destiny, call Andy or email him at andy@myperfectfranchise.net. Again, that's andy@myperfectfranchise.net. And we want to thank Andy Ludicky and My Perfect Franchise for sponsoring the Wednesday night live stream here on Texas Football. Marcus, got a lot of my fellow Cowboys fans will suffer together talking about the draft in the chat. Any thoughts on the draft this weekend, Marcus? Probably not going to hear Longhorn name called in the first round tomorrow night, but it still should be a pretty solid weekend for this program overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you'll still see some guys, selected. I imagine Anthony Hill's probably first off the board. If I had to guess, after that, maybe Manny Muhammad, and then beyond that, who knows? But it only takes a team, to fall in love with a particular player and, end up grabbing them somewhere, maybe where you wouldn't have initially thought he would have gone in the draft. So I think overall it'll be another, banner year for the program. I think, next year is probably the one that everyone's, looking towards. I too am a Cowboys fan. However, I have found a way to detach emotionally from them. Probably, I think back when they drafted Zeke is when I was like, okay, like at this point, I'm not going to be emotionally invested. So the only team that really gets my blood pressure up anymore is my Longhorns. And so I never know what the Cowboys are going to do. Like sometimes, I mean, a lot of times, I kind of wonder what some of their philosophy is on some of this stuff, but it'll be interesting to see, what they ultimately end up doing.
It's I don't want to. I know Matthew's going to enjoy this, but and I don't want to turn this into a Dallas Cowboys deal. But
Yeah.
I would like to see, because they're both Metroplex kids, one of Manny Muhammad or Ant Hill. It'd be cool to see them end up with the Cowboys. Just to, number one, stay in the state of Texas, but your Metroplex kids playing for the Cowboys, like I think that means something on some level. But like, they're doing their pre-draft press conference today, and then like Bill Clinton walks in the room at some point. I'm like, can you just have like just a normal, like, what is it like to have a normal just pre-draft press conference where, you don't have to have a former president of the United States just walk in the room at random. Like, can you just be normal for just a 30-minute press conference? That's all I'm asking for. Marcus, it used to be, and that's one thing I will credit Sark for, even though, year one, you had that like 2-week stretch where you had the Bo Davis bus rant on top of the loss to Iowa State, and then you lost to Kansas. I think that was probably rock bottom in the lost decade. But knock on wood, it's been a while since we've seen Texas be that kind of circus where, I think, what did Rod call it? I think he said it was UTTMZ for a while around the acres. Knock on wood and cross your fingers. It's been a minute, thankfully, Marcus, since we've had any kind of that stuff going on around the program.
Yeah, agreed. And like you said, knock on wood, we certainly need that good luck or good fortune, or just the guys, choosing that football is important enough, to them to stay out of any foolishness, and, kind of the same throughout staff and you name it. So I think, they're in a good place, but this is the time of year where you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble, because you get to breathe a little bit before really you kind of gear up for the stretch run. I mean, granted, it's not like summer camp, but I mean, if you want to play, you're going to be here this summer, and you're, like I said, your coaches are going to be around you quite a bit. So, it's another opportunity for you to kind of try to earn your minutes, because if you didn't already this spring, there's not going to be a large window come fall for you to, be able to kind of secure your reps, because at that point, we're getting ready for real ball. So, it's a different day and age, and a different way to go about it. But, this is the times we're in. So now it's like, to your point, we get the draft, starting tomorrow. I guess after that, you keep your eye on some mini camps a little bit. And then we're looking for like when the times of games drops, right? And then like beyond that, it's looking at everything else that's happening on the 40. And, obviously we'll have plenty, to still discuss, but we're going to start moving into those dog days of summer here pretty quick before we know it. So, it's one of those things you just got to kind of keep pushing through.
Get you those fun workouts where you're having to dodge a little heat stroke during your
just a little bit.
Builds character. Roger does point out, said, Jeff, we had it for 1 week when the news about Sark leaving. That's the closest Texas got. That was just a weekend. So thankfully, like the Diana Rossini report, and man, that was a deal. Where,
Diana Rossini.
Well, yeah, and yeah, she has been in the news lately for stuff not related to reports on the University of Texas. But that was one of those deals, Marcus. Like that report came out that morning, and then Sark had to put out the statement. And then you start like early fourth quarter, that Mississippi State game. You're like, man, this is going about as bad as it could go. And then I feel like every Texas quarterback, like we remember the game where everybody where the great ones kind of came alive, but there was always one before that where you really saw them. Okay, this is when they kind of figured it out, and then they got on track, and then had the big game. With VY. Everybody points to that Michigan Rose Bowl that, oh, yeah, that was when VY took off. But if you go back, man, the Texas Tech game, because coming off the Missouri game where I think he got hurt, and then Chance Mock finishes the game. And I've said it before, Marcus, I'll say it again. There are there were people, media personalities in Austin, Texas, that will deny it now, but couldn't deny it then, that were openly campaigning for VY to move to wide receiver. Like, this is not going to work. He's not a quarterback. Like, just go ahead and do it. And then go out to Lubbock and play in Lubbock at night. It's always a challenge. And that was the game where it felt like, all right, maybe VY starting to figure it out. And then boom, he was off and running. I think we'll look back at the second half of that Mississippi State game, specifically that fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. We'll look back at that as the moment like, yeah, that was when it came together for Arch. That was when, the yips early in the season, and then he had, came alive during the OU game, and the Kentucky game might have been the worst game the offense played all year. But that fourth quarter, that's when we saw Arch mature on the fly, Marcus take that step that all the great quarterbacks take, where he's like, look, win, lose, or draw, I'm putting you guys on my back. Anybody that wants to follow me, but I'm going to try to get us across the finish line. And he, along with that Ryan Niblett punt return, got Texas to overtime, and they end up winning the game. I think we'll look back at that as kind of the genesis of whatever Arch becomes this year.
Yeah, I agree. And you can almost pinpoint it there forward, where, you look at when we had the media availability with him, and he talked about just like, yeah, I was pissed off, for the first chunk of the season. Like, I wasn't playing how I wanted to, and it wasn't fun. And I think from there forward, he just stopped caring as much about perceptions and that kind of thing, and just went out there and played. And then, it showed up in his play. He seemed a lot more confident. He started enjoying himself again. And that, becomes something that begins to permeate throughout a team. And so I'm with you, Jeff. I think that's pretty astute in pointing that out, that, we'll probably look back on his time here at Texas and be like, okay, that's when he, truly kind of took off.
Did you guys internally, Marcus, as players, did y'all ever lose faith in VY, or was there a belief that, he's our guy, he'll get it, he'll get on the right track at some point?
Yeah, I can't speak for like anybody else, but I know in our class for sure we didn't, because we all came in together, and he was one of, kind of the final pieces to the puzzle of that class, in terms of when he actually committed and all that. But like, the whole thought the entire time was, it was going to be pretty likely that we were all going to be in the same class together, and that with him, we'd eventually be able to, pull off a championship. So it was kind of one of those deals, like, since we all came in together, you remember this, Jeff, back then, like, freshmen came in before, the upperclassmen did for a few days.
Yeah.
And so we were all, fully behind him. The conversation around him getting moved to wide receiver was outside of our building, right? And then, there was a couple of upperclassmen that just like to like rib underclassmen. And so, they might poke at him a little bit on that, but no different than any other player. But that wasn't a sentiment that any of us, I would say from that 0-2 forward shared, because it was one of those deals, like, in practice, you see guys do really special stuff. And when you have someone that's that big and can move that fast, and just has the ability to throw from some different arm angles and stuff, like, we knew we had something special there. So that was never like a real thing, amongst us. It was more the noise, that's kind of outside of programs.
There are certain instances over the years where I'm thankful for everybody's sanity that social media wasn't a thing. That week between the Missouri game and the Texas Tech game in 2004 is one of those weeks where I'm thankful there wasn't Twitter or anything else, because you're able to keep it in house.
And I want to throw one other thing out there. I mean, CB's saying this about VY was going to transfer. VY was frustrated. If for any, Jeff knows this well. You could ask Bobby. You could ask Jerry. There's stories about countless players from countless teams, Texas and otherwise, packing up and driving home, right? And a coach having to get on, the phone to, figure out, all right, how do we get this guy back? VY wasn't ever really going to transfer. He was extremely frustrated, and he did leave Austin and started heading to Houston. Unfortunately, he did, have, someone that he could kind of talk to, in Steve McNair, rest in peace, that, kind of talked him off the ledge. But we've all had to be talked off the ledge for something, one time or another. Just, some stories take on a greater life than their own. But I mean, there's guys that I could tell you literally, like,
Countless.
As teammates, we had to like drive to Dallas or Houston or San Antonio and be like, man, what are you doing? Like, come on back. Like, we'll figure this out. But it was out of frustration. And especially back then, there wasn't a transfer portal. There wasn't NIL. So like you're balled up and frustrated, by any number of things. So the first thing to do is like, let me get out of here and get somewhere that, is home and feels, safe and comfortable. But we weren't letting VY go anywhere, man. He wasn't really going to transfer.
That I guess you do have to take it a little more seriously. You can't just take it with a grain of salt in the portal era when the portal is dangling out there. But man, I lost count of I can't tell you how many guys that went on to be all conference guys, draft picks, NFL players, all Americans that as freshmen. Like, hey man, so and so ain't happy. Well, he's a freshman that's not getting to play. Like, of course he's frustrated. Like, tell me something I don't know. Like, tell me one that wasn't, and I'll show you one that probably didn't end up producing much because they were probably just content to have the uniform on. Like, yeah, if you're not playing and things aren't going well, you should be frustrated. I want a guy to be frustrated because that means he cares. So, so all that stuff constantly floats around. But, yeah. CB, I agree. Yeah, man, there's seasons in the late Mac years and the Charlie Strong years and the Tom Herman years that whenever I leave this mortal earth, my wife can blame some of those Texas coaching tenures that this is a year or two off my life that I didn't get because of this 3-year period right here. So just file that away for later. All right, let's go ahead and thank another one of our sponsors here on the Wednesday night live stream here at On Texas Football and let you know that this edition of On Texas Football is brought to you by Prize Picks. And I'm telling you, if you're watching games and you're not on the Prize Picks app, then you're doing it wrong and you're missing out on half the fun. It gives you a reason to care about everything that's going on, every play, every moment. It all matters. You're locked in the whole time, and you have a chance to pad the wallet a little bit along the way. And it's easy, no complicated stuff. Trust me, if I can figure this out, anybody can figure it out. You're just going more or less on player stats. Trust me, that's it. Points, yards, hits, assists, whatever you're watching, you build your lineup and let it ride. You can literally make and submit a lineup in about 60 seconds. And the best part, you can mix sports however you want. Maybe one night it's hoops and the next night it's baseball. You can mix anything and everything, a little hockey, a little golf, esports, if that's your thing. However you want to do it, Prize Picks lets you do it. Today, we've got Rangers pitcher Jack Leiter with more than 5.5 strikeouts. He's averaging nearly 7 per game. In the NBA, we have Jalen Green scoring more than 18.5 points. He's averaging just under 21 in his last 5 games. And that's the fun of it. You trust your read on what's going on. You throw your lineup together. Now you've got a reason to care about every single swing, every single basket. It all matters with Prize Picks. If you haven't tried it yet, now's the time. Just download the Prize Picks app, use the code HMA, play $5, and they're giving you $50 in lineups instantly. Again, that's code HMA, play 5, get 50. That is a heck of a deal. And as always, play smart, play responsibly, play Prize Picks. All right, chat is wild. So thank you guys.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what is happening here. We're all over the place again, and now somehow we're back on this play caller conversation.
I mentioned Diana Rossini, and thank you, Silver Spurs Sicko and Sandman for. By the way, we missed it earlier in the chat. Marcus Silver Spurs Sicko said he got a picture with Sark on Saturday at the event. It said Sark smells good. So if anybody was wondering, even after an open practice where he's on the job, apparently Sark smelled good post-practice on Saturday. So take that for whatever it's worth. Cleanliness is next to godliness, so at least the head coach is practicing good hygiene. Yeah, Marcus, Hefty Taco says Sark the play caller is still suspect at Texas. How many times did Texas only score once on offense last season? Look, we can have this conversation, but I will say I don't want Sark to give up play calling until he is 100% ready to give it up. Because if he's forced to do it or thinks it's the right time to do it and he's not ready, that it doesn't matter who you bring in as the play caller. It's just going to get convoluted and there's not going to be one voice. And it's just going to – we've seen that at Texas with collaborative play calling and all this other stuff when there wasn't one voice on a side of the ball. I want Sark Marcus to get that just completely out of his system before he thinks about giving up, to where he feels like it's going to have to get to the point where he feels like he doesn't need to call plays on game day to function as a coach.
Yeah, and I mean he said it multiple times, so I'm not like that's why I was kind of wringing my hands over here a little bit. Is like this is off season fodder, so it's all fair,
Yeah.
and I'm fine having the conversation. But he's flat out said multiple times like I like calling plays and I'm a good play caller, so I'm going to keep calling plays. Some of my responses to some of the questions to Hefty Taco: how many times did Texas only score once in offense last season? I would also ask you, how many times was a guy wide open that was schemed wide open? They didn't just shake somebody off the line or make some kind of incredible play, but a perfect play was drawn up. And for a chunk of the season early, Art sometimes dirted the ball, or a guy just flat out dropped it and had grass for days in front of him. So, we can play the if and the how many times. And I mean, he himself has taken accountability for, hey, I got to be better in certain situations. Certainly, he's mentioned the Ohio State game and a number of different, media availabilities or press conferences or, podcast appearances here lately. But just, I think the concept that like he should give it up. Okay, cool. Then who do you hand it off to? Right? Like he was literally brought here because of his offensive play calling. Like that was the reason for taking the chance on him. And so to me, I just think that in Arch's final year with some of the weapons that they have around them and things of that nature, like I think that's going to lend to Sark being able to call plays in a manner that is a lot more familiar and that everybody involved is going to be a bit more comfortable with, if merely for the fact that Arch has a number of games under his belt now. So I understand the conversation, but I also just have issues with just laying it solely at his feet. In that end, that he's a head man, so the buck certainly stops with him. But I mean, I can think off the top of my head 5 touchdowns that were left on the field because a player didn't make a play, not because Sark called a bad play. So we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding. By the time week 2 rolls around and you end up in a goal line situation against Ohio State again. But I'm perfectly comfortable with how he goes about calling plays. And by the end of the year I don't know if anybody was truly complaining about any of the plays that were being called, right? Like once the offensive line kind of gelled and Arch got hot, like we were kind of cooking with grease for the most part. So I don't know. I disagree.
There is something to be said, and I'm not saying this is all of it because look, Sark certainly he's not perfect as a play caller.
Yeah, absolutely not.
But I do appreciate the fact that in rivalry games against Oklahoma, throw Arkansas in there now, and A&M, like those games on the schedule, like that's when Sark seems to be at his best. Like he's the 2 games he's called, especially this. If you look at the games he called last season, Vanderbilt, I thought he did a great job calling plays against in the Vanderbilt game. But the second half of the A&M game, Marcus, that's one of the best games Sark has called.
Mm-hmm.
Is the second half of A&M. I didn't think they were going to score a touchdown giving the ball to Nick Townsend on the jet sweep on the 3-yard line. Like that's the kind of stuff that I think you have to give him credit for. Certainly, if you're gonna blame him for the shortcomings, then you got to give him credit when things go right.
Agreed. Yeah, and I love Coach Davis, right? So I saw CB saying he was the best OC in Texas history. He also had Superman back there, so there were times where there were things that he called and BY was just like, no, I'm gonna go do this, not like in a defiant way, right? But the play was there for him to do something else. And so, I'm not going to argue against it. Coach Davis was my area recruiter, love him to death. I also think most offensive coordinators that have Vince Young as their quarterback. And I think the thing I would give Coach Davis and, then by proxy, Coach Brown, the most credit for was their willingness to change the offense to make sense for VY, right? And not just do the thing that, their offense for however long says to do, right? They went to VY and said, hey, what's the stuff you like, and make sure they implemented it. So I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if just pure drawing a play up in the dirt, I would say maybe Coach Davis is a better OC than Sark. I wouldn't necessarily say that. Like I've seen, that I still don't know what the name of the play is, but the one where, 2 years ago, like there was guys going every which direction and like Quinn is faking this way.
Oh,
And
Florida game.
The end around. Yeah, the Florida game. Like that's one of the most like the best play calls I've ever seen, honestly. Like it was just a really cool play and it was effective. So I think Sark now has a level of confidence in Arch where he can probably call more of the plays that he wants to, and has the personnel, I think, that's capable of executing.
I didn't plan on having a Sark OC conversation, Marcus, but that's where the chat wants to go. So let's just take it there because we got a lot of comments on it. Coach Steve Sarkisian says some of those years after VY, he had 0 run game and still found a way to score touchdowns and win games. Let's not forget, Colt McCoy left college as the winningest quarterback in NCAA history. So it's not like you just had nothing going on offense after VY left. And to Greg Davis's credit, again, you talk about building the offense around VY. He did the same thing with Colt. Like you go
right.
I think the best game Greg Davis called in his tenure at Texas was the 2008 Oklahoma game when they made the adjustment to move Jordan Shipley, basically use him as a flex tight end and just have him attack the middle of the field. I thought Greg Davis was brilliant, but they weren't running. It wasn't all about zone read at that point. It's almost like a West Coast offense. It's high percentage passes, it's rhythm, it's timing, it's getting the ball out quick. Obviously, Colt had a hell of a rapport with Jordan Shipley and Quan Cosby. So, yeah, it's not like he just had scraps to work with. Greg Davis did after VY left, Marcus. He had some good pieces to work with.
And for as frustrating as it could be at times when like you get to an end of the season, you're not the Big 12 champion. Like I still got to point out, like we were in the Big 12. Like we still played the Baylors of the world quite a bit, and that kind of thing. So that certainly helps. When you have, we probably had like 4 or 5 games a year in conference that we could kind of circle and just be like, all right, like this is going to be a good stat game, and so again, I love Coach Davis, so I'm not trying to take anything away from him. Just contextually, it's a lot easier to look back on, what those teams were and what their output was. And I think, maybe if we were in a different conference, it could have potentially looked a little different at the time, especially because the body types that we had versus what the SEC kind of had and was known for at that time. We didn't really start kind of getting into that phase until really the last year of the Big 12 with Sark, where he was kind of starting to recruit in that manner. So it'll be interesting. It'll be a good conversation, I think, 5-10 years down the road to kind of look back on, what his, the Sark era ultimately looked like. But it's, for me, it's a little tough to compare, apples to apples.
Cisco makes a really good point here. It says, my main issue with Sark is him being stubborn and not playing the hits like Rod calls it. And he doesn't break tendency at the right time. On the playing the hits, I think last year, a lot of that had to do with the fact, and look, he was responsible for building the roster. So it's that double-edged sword of, hey, you don't trust the tools you work with. Well, you're the one who acquired the tools. I think, Marcus, especially like you look at points in the Georgia game in the first half where like they actually were able to run the ball in spurts, but he didn't trust it enough to stick with it. And that was the theme a lot of games last year where it was maybe the run game or the deep ball or whatever it was. There were just certain elements that, whether it was Arch being off or the offensive line or guys dropping balls, whatever, he just didn't trust certain elements of this offense at the right time, where even if it was working, I don't think he trusted himself to be able to stick with it and felt the need to go somewhere else. Now, again, is that on him? Yes, 100%. Like you said, he's the head coach. The buck stops with him. He's ultimately responsible for the roster. But I think you see a difference in Sark when he's got elements of the offense that he really trusts, and when he does it. And I think that's why there's 2 different Texas offenses for me last year. There was the first 7 games and then the last 6. I mentioned Georgia, but you look at the 5 games they won down the stretch with Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Arkansas A&M, and then Michigan. Sark started to trust Arch, and you can tell the play calling took on a different tone when Sark figured out, okay, here's what I know Arch does well now. This is what I can trust him to do situationally. And then boom, now you've got a foundation. I just feel like for the first half plus of the year last year, they just had no foundation offensively.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those deals where, again, I think they're fair, criticisms. My issue has never really been so much his true play calling, but more the timing of calling certain plays. Like there have been instances where there's been, me kind of wondering like, okay, why did we call that there? As opposed to either earlier in the game or in maybe a different scenario. But again, like I think you would be, a person would be being disingenuous if they didn't say like they saw plenty of guys scheme wide open, and for whatever reason, the play didn't get executed the way in which it needed to be, or if it did, there was a penalty that brought it back, right? Like that's yardage and points that's left out there that has nothing to do with his ability to draw up a play. And so, I think it's fair. And even to Cisco Diaz's point here, like Sark admitted he was being stubborn. Like I'm telling you, on that Get Got podcast that he did with Marshawn and with Michael Robinson, like they asked him, when was the time you got right? Like a time that a opposing coach, had your number, and he was like, against Ohio State, and I made the decision to do something that, effectively was a stubborn choice. So I think at the very least, the fact that he is willing not only to kind of, I guess, state the obvious, if you will, gives me hope that, to your point, with a roster that I think he feels a little bit better about in its totality, that, those will be things he can adjust off of. The other thing I think I find to be interesting is like, you didn't have a ton of other options last year, right? Whereas you look this year, and I think the depth has been built up in a way where it's not just like a guy that you need to just be able to take snaps. It's a guy that can come in, and the drop off should be relatively minimal. And I think that's why you've seen him, kind of recruit, whether it's from the portal or from the high school ranks, in the way in which he has, because I think, if, knock on wood, guys go down in certain spots, there's other guys that can step in and play more than admirably. Whereas I don't know if you had that maybe in some key areas last year.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, Marcus, but what you described, that's been my biggest criticism of Sark. I just call it sequencing, like especially like some of the possessions. Everybody looks at the Ohio State one, and that was, man, the toss should just be fired into the sun. Like seriously, it's like the lowest of low percentage run plays. But I go back to the 2023 season, and when OU had that goal line stand where you had first and goal at the 1 and you couldn't punch it in against Oklahoma, your third down call was the toss to Jonathan Brooks, which again, the toss, I hate it. Yeah. But your fourth down call was that tunnel screen to Xavier Worthy, which almost scored. I'm like, I would have thrown the toss out, called the tunnel screen on third down.
Right.
Now I
got an option on fourth.
Now it's probably like fourth and a frog hair, and then okay, now you've got a few more options. You got a little more margin for error. So that's been I guess if I've got a chief complaint against Sark, that's probably it. Is sometimes the sequencing is just out of whack a little bit.
Yeah, I like the word sequencing better than timing, and I think that accurately describes what I was getting at, Joe.
Coach Steve Sarkisian, thank you. You win the Done Good Award. You get the prize for tonight. Also, Jonathan Brooks doesn't go down in 2023. The narrative around Sark is for sure different. You know why? Because he
win a national champion.
He trusted Jonathan Brooks. Yep. And that trust, I'm telling you, that Washington game is different. And I really thought by the end of the year, Texas and Michigan were the two best teams in the country. And I would have loved to have seen them go head to head. But last minute, get it. Silver Spur Sicko, you would have gotten the award had you let me know you were saving a spot for me at the fire sale on Saturday. But for that, you don't get the award. So yeah, he let me know like 2 days later, Marcus, that he was saving a spot.
Hey, I was holding you a spot.
I said that information would have been really helpful about
useful
9:30 Saturday morning. So now right. For Sicko, I kid. I just very, very much appreciate the very much appreciate the contributions. All right, let's take another one of our sponsors here on the live stream. Give a shout out to our friends over at Rogue Shop. RogueShop.com is where you need to go because Rogue Shop is bringing real plant medicine back to its roots. Rogue Shop ships nationwide. Make sure you use the promo code ON Texas for a special discount. And Rogue Shop has it all from oils and creams to flour and gummies. Again, that's rogueshop.com. Use the code ONTexas for a special discount. And we want to thank our friends at Rogue Shop for sponsoring the Wednesday night live stream here on Texas Football. Yes, Silver.
What else I did today, Jeff? Oh, go ahead.
No, Silver Spur Sicko said you period did and period ask. Yeah, we'll agree to disagree on that, I guess. Go ahead, Marcus. I didn't mean to cut
today I renewed my season tickets. My window opened up today, and so I had tickets in 2 different sections. I was able to kind of consolidate and move some of them a little closer. So we're off and running in that regard.
Hey, how does that happen, by the way? Because I've talked to multiple season ticket holders over the years where they just have tickets and had them for years, but they're in 2 different sections. Like, how does that happen? Is this just a random deal?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what's available, right? When you get your tickets, like, can you hold on to them? I know when CDC came in, they moved the student section, and so then you kind of get reallocated some. And then, when your window opens, it's all determined by like loyalty points and all this different stuff. I get to pick, from kind of the Letterman sections. So that at least helps a little bit. And then if people move somewhere else or they choose not to renew or for whatever reason, then you can kind of move stuff around within your window. But yeah, initially, like, I wanted to make sure I had 4 together, and I like having at least 1 aisle seat. So I did that. And then when I added some additional, there just weren't any more, in that same row or section. So then you just kind of take what makes sense and where else, you like what's available.
Yeah, because, before I started covering games and I was going to games, you got a friend or somebody that's got tickets, like,
right.
Hey, you want to go to the game? This time I'm on the rotation where we're in the upper deck, but if you want to come, you can come. Like, hey, no, my tickets are on the 5-yard line this time, like 3 rows back. So if you want to go, you get a better seat.
Yeah.
So I've always heard that. Just I was wondering how that worked out. But now CDC's got the getting the season ticket deal figured out, and I don't want to. This is neither here nor there. There's sort of a lot of people losing their season tickets for getting dinged for selling them on the secondary market or selling them to brokers. So
it kind of, it depends too. I can't remember, I know he showed some kind of graphic in the town hall, but like, I think SeatGeek is like the official partner or whatever. And so you can sell them through that. I think to your point, it's, there are sometimes people that'll snap up like extra tickets in other places. And then, you're selling it to the same known broker. I know every now and then, like, if I don't go to a women's basketball game, I'll get an email that's like, we're sorry, we noticed you didn't use your tickets this week. Know that this program is available and you can give tickets back to this program, or you can return them to coaches and all these different things. And usually for me, it's just like something came up last minute. So
I've got my Jonathan Brooks hill that I'm going to die on. All right, Cubed is going to die on this hill. So CDC, for God's sake, give us some shade at DKR. All right, Cubed. I don't know that that's in the architectural plans, but just be sure to let the boss man know whenever you can, and he may take it under advisement to get some.
You can message him on X. He'll probably respond to you, but then he might ask you, how do you expect? What's your suggestion on how he gets that done?
I have seen him respond to questions and suggestions that are way more asinine than wondering about shaded DKR.
Absolutely. So, I agree.
Chances are, all right, Cube, you'll get a response in some way, shape, or form. I want to get back to the Sark play calling conversation real quick, because MJF 206 brings us up. Says, sorry, but sequencing is easy to criticize in hindsight compared to a play caller that has 10 seconds to make a decision while multitasking with other coaches, players, refs, the clock, etc. It's valid, but also, like, the situation that I was bringing up specifically was if it's a goal-to-go situation, Marcus, that's stuff you've worked out in practice. Like, you've got an idea, okay, if we've got first and goal at the 3 or whatever, or from the 5 going in, this is kind of the list of stuff we've got. Or if it's from the 10 to the 5, from the 10 in, this is the list of stuff we got. If we're just in the red zone, like, you've worked on that in practice situationally. So you're going to go into a game with a pretty good idea based on the situation of what you're going to call and how you're going to call it.
Yeah. And I think MJF, I'll just add, and hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth here either, Jeff, but neither of us were advocating for Sark to give up play calling, right? And the way this conversation started was there were some folks in the chat saying he needs to give up play calling. And so, what I started out calling timing, I think Jeff more astutely, said it as sequencing, was if we had to critique something, that's what it would be. And then, again, to Jeff's point, like there are elements of, situational football that you work on, often. And I mean, when it gets down to it, again, I think this is one of the things I appreciate about Sark. He's pretty transparent. He's been pretty accountable on different things. And so not only has he said like, hey, I got some of these things wrong, but, further than that, that's why he gets paid the big bucks. So yes, it is criticizing in hindsight. And if you are the state's highest paid employee, like that's kind of what comes with it, And so, as we kind of wrap a bow on that, I wasn't, really saying I have issue with this play calling. I'm saying if we are going to have a conversation about play calling, the piece that I would nitpick on would be sequencing. But personally, I like Sark as a play caller, and there's probably not, I don't know. I don't see myself finding 3 other guys in college football that I'd be willing to trade for.
It seems like anytime stuff goes wrong on offense, there's 3 people that get blamed: the play caller, the quarterback, and then for whatever reason, in my time watching, following, covering, analyzing Texas football, the center, Marcus, for whatever reason, is usually 3rd on that list because it's an O-line problem, and for whatever reason, it's the center. I mean, whether it's been, you go all the way back to Matt Anderson to Jason Glenn, pretty much with the exception of Lyle Sinline, like every center at some point in their time playing at Texas has gotten blamed for stuff going wrong.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But no, I'll add to on the red zone aspect, because we at this time last year, like this summer, penalties is going to be a really big point of conversation, and it should be, because when you're pretty close to butt naked last at FBS and penalties per game and penalty yards per game, like that's just flat out not good enough. And again, I'm not asking for Texas to be Indiana where you're like number 1, number 2 in the country in penalties. I'm just like, get to the middle of the pack and you're infinitely better than you were last year. Yep. But at this time last year was red zone. Talking about red zone. Well, going back to the identity and having a foundation and pieces and players that Sark trusts, once he started to trust Arch became your red zone weapon. And all of a sudden, it became a lot easier to call plays in the red zone once Sark figured out, hey, yeah, I'm going to trust Arch's legs, trust Arch as a runner. And now with the RPO and the ability Arch has to run the football, like now you can do stuff in the red zone that actually is going to put defenders in conflict and make you much harder to defend. So I will give Sark credit for that, for finally kind of saying, hey, I haven't really had a quarterback run game in a long time. It's not my bag, but this is what Arch does well. So, hey, let's just roll with it. And they rolled with it and it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm also excited about the prospect of, having Muschamp's kind of aggressive style of defense, hopefully being a little more complimentary, and the two kind of working in tandem, right? Like, so one of my predictions is we were doing bold predictions at whatever point, and I said, whatever the defensive touchdown record is for a season, that this defense will be the one to break it. But in doing that, even if they don't break it, if they're just continuing to kind of create that chaos, that havoc, and turning the ball over a little bit more, well, that's additional opportunities, for the offense. And so at that point, you're maybe not as concerned about, again, it's kind of like styles makes fights thing, right? Like you're not as concerned about, okay, the bend but don't break philosophy, but rather, all right, like we may miss some here, we might get scored on some, but there's going to be a number of times where we're going to get the ball back. And so I feel maybe a little more confident to call something here where maybe I would have been much more conservative. And then similarly, to your point of the talent level, Jeff, like, again, I love Trey Wisner. I think he was a great Longhorn. I just don't think he's as dynamic of a player as what's in that backfield now. I liked the receiving core last year. I love it now. And I think it goes, it has more depth than it did last year. And so I think that in itself begins to give you as a play caller more confidence. And then obviously, you have Arch that, we're hoping and expecting to take another leap. So I think it all kind of works together like a nice gumbo as it begins to kind of simmer and the flavors all begin to meld. And then, you see what it looks like, come the fall. But I'm very excited about what is to come. I'm just trying to be, cautiously optimistic, but if you got some truth serum in me, or Allen's not on here, I don't think tonight. If you got Marcus after Darkest, I'd probably be calling for some pretty outlandish numbers and stuff for what I expect of this 2026 squad.
You're in the same boat CJ is it. Every time CJ and I are on a live or on a video, it's like, man, I'm trying not to get out over my skis on this, but it's hard not to, because just again, looking at kind of where we started tonight, just look at the roster. The roster is elite. You just don't see a ton of holes, so you see the potential that it's got.
It's just an on paper conversation, right? And I'll tell you the next wave is going to make it pretty wild. And it's always funny when it happens, especially now that the game's back. Wait until NCAA comes back out. Like when they drop this year's version, and you go on there and like Arch is a 97 and Collins a 99, and then Cam Coleman is a 98, right? And everybody's going to be running to play with Texas because they're going to have an extremely talented roster. So it's just one of those deals where you got to try to temper your expectations and, kind of channel it until we get live bullets.
Well, you got Bo Jackson and Tecmo Super Bowl. You got Michael Vick and like Madden 0304. Tell you what, VY and NCAA 06, you could not stop zone read in that game. So fun times indeed. Marcus, you brought up a couple of things that I want to make sure we hit before we get out of here. But before we do that, one more time, let's thank our lead sponsor for the Wednesday night live stream. Give a shout out to Andy Ludicky and My Perfect Franchise. If you want control over your own destiny, maybe franchise ownership is right for you. If you think that's the case, give Andy Ludicky a call. Andy's an expert at placing people in the right franchise that fits your strengths and your finances. Franchise ownership isn't for everybody, but if you've got a desire to take control of your destiny, call Andy or email him at andy@myperfectfranchise.net. Again, that's andy@myperfectfranchise.net. And we want to thank Andy Ludicky and My Perfect Franchise for sponsoring the Wednesday night live stream here at On Texas Football. Marcus, I'm trying to find, there it is. Coach Steve Sarkisian brought up, said, Muschamp forcing quick change is going to unleash Sark's big play hunting. To your point, if you're forcing a lot of turnovers, you have a lot of sudden change. I love if you got a defense that is going to get you an extra possession or two. I love taking a shot on a sudden change.
Now, if there is a criticism that I have of any coach, and I know it doesn't always work out this way, but like I swear I have seen both at Texas and just watching college football in general, too many instances where a defense gets them a turnover, you're at the 50 or on the plus side of it, and the first play out is like a dive. Like it is the thing that, like, if you're ever within earshot of me in the stadium, you will hear me screaming at the top of my lungs, take a shot. Because to your point, like that's where you get the knockout blows, right? That's where you like literally steal it. Rod Wright and Frank Oakham, we would always kind of joke around. They would say stuff like, this is where we steal your soul, right? And usually they were referencing the defensive play, but once you get the ball back on offense, like if you can go out and get a big gain or a touchdown, like immediately off of a turnover, it doesn't have to be some long sustained drive. Like that's one of those things that really, like, you begin to, as a player, you see the life draining out of your opponent. Like you see them, okay, like we thought we could hang around, but we're not going to be able to today. And so I absolutely agree with them. Like, I think that's one of those deals where if we can, generate more turnovers and get that ball back, I think you're going to see Sark, kind of open it up.
Brian Harsin, when he was the OC at Texas, he used to talk about it on the call sheet for every game. He called them silver bullets, and based on situations, it could be a deep play action shot, it could be an out and up, something that there's going to be certain situations in the game where you can dial that up, and you can't miss those opportunities because you've got to be able to seize that opportunity. And he talked about sudden change is one of those. If you're in the right part of the field on a sudden change, go ahead and take the shot. Like that's what you put it on the call sheet for. Is for an opportunity like that. The other thing, Marcus, that I do want to get to, you mentioned running back, and I'll get to this real quick, and we'll have to probably continue this conversation later as we start to wind down. But, we talk about the ability and the depth that this backfield has. I really think this backfield is going to give Sark what he thought he was going to have in 2024. Because you had Wisner had 1,000-yard year, and we didn't know Trey Wisner was going to be what he was. But you had Wisner, and we knew what Jaden Blue was, and he ends up being kind of that versatile, almost like an extra receiver on the field. But he's your big play guy. What you didn't have that finisher. You didn't have that guy that was a thumper between the tackles. It would have been C.J. Baxter if he hadn't gotten hurt before the year started. I think that's Derek Cooper's role. I think Derek Cooper is that thumper between the tackles that probably when push comes to shove, if you need to salt the game away in the fourth quarter, he's probably going to be the guy in the game that you're salting away with.
Yeah, and I think because those other two are so dynamic, like you can structure your offense in a way throughout the year where everybody is pretty fresh. And if you get to that back end of the season where you are needing to salt games away, we talk about it all the time. At that point, these guys aren't freshmen anymore. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not having to utilize Derek Cooper in a way where I'm asking him to get 10, 15 touches every single game early in the season, by the time you get to the back end of the season, I think you certainly would feel much more comfortable in giving him 10, 12 touches, and especially some of those like high leverage, short yardage ones, right? And so I think the fact that to start the season, you have kind of that level of dynamic ability with those, other two running backs and Smothers and Riley Brown, it gives Cooper a chance to come along a bit more naturally as opposed to kind of having to force it.
100%.
Right? And so that's what I'm saying. Like, this is where I'm trying to temper my enthusiasm of what I see being, out there for the taking. But I mean, you even think about in the passing game, like if you use some of those guys, and we looked at all the numbers when, they were in the portal. I'm sure we'll, do some position deep dives and stuff during the offseason. But those are two of the more explosive running backs in the country last year. Well, okay, what if they're ripping off, a big run or, catching the ball out of the backfield and you just need a breather? Now you got a sledgehammer that kind of comes in there. Like, that's the things that keeps defensive off balance and something that, again, knock on wood, praying these guys are able to stay healthy and start the season kind of as a true trio, if you will.
And the hope for me is those guys grow in their roles enough to where once you get deep into SEC play, you can have any combination of them on the field and you're not predictable. Like, correct. It doesn't need to be, okay, when Raleigh Brown's in the game, in this situation, they're going to do this. Like, no, it needs to be diverse. It needs to be dynamic, but that's going to be something that unfolds. But I really think this backfield could be every bit and then some what Sark thought he was going to have or hoped he'd have in 2024. One more thing before we get out of here, just real quick. CB brings it up. Happy birthday, Mikael Thompson, Jonathan Gray, and Donna Hawkins. In my book, that's 3 good dudes right there. So happy birthday to those lifetime Longhorns. That's going to do it for us on the live stream tonight. Marcus, I think we're both on deck potentially for some draft coverage tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's live stream, we will be following the first round of the NFL draft. So it'll start normal time on our live stream, 7 o'clock. It'll be that winning drive crew of Rod Babers, Coach Bob Shipley, and CJ Vogel. I'm going to pop in. Marcus is potentially popping in. I think we may get a Jerry Hamilton appearance. So we'll be going throughout the first round of the draft. I want to thank our sponsors for this edition of On Texas Football. That's Andy Ludicky and My Perfect Franchise, Rogue Shop, and Prize Picks. If you're not a member over at OnTexasFootball.com, now is the time to get over to the site and take advantage of our spring sale. When you get over there and sign up, use the promo code OTFOG, and that'll get you 1 year of access at OnTexasFootball.com for just $39.95. Make sure that you hit that like button, that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel, and that you've got those notifications set. That way, whenever we drop a video or go live, you're not missing any of our Longhorn coverage or breaking news. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, thanks everybody for participating in the chat tonight. If you got anything else, make sure you direct it to the guys bright and early at Coffee and Football first thing in the morning. So until then, for Marcus, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, welcome.